They told me to play a happy song after the massacre. I woke up smelling jasmine and sulfur, and for a second, I thought my apartment was on fire. Then I realized the scent was coming from my pillow, her perfume. It had seeped into the fabric, a ghostly reminder that whatever happened last night wasn't a nightmare. It had followed me home. My head was a hornet's nest of questions. A club called the Orpheus, a boss who wasn't entirely human, a song list that read like a madman's poetry. I spent the morning hunched over my laptop, typing every possible search query. Nothing. No record of the place, no business license, no hushed blog posts about a club where the patrons have too many teeth. It almost made a twisted kind of sense. This city has a way of swallowing people. You hear stories. A guy goes out for cigarettes and vanishes. A couple's car is found by the river, empty. We always blame the usual suspects. Gangs, dealers, the kind of mundane evil you can wrap your head around. But a clientele of monsters? A whole shadow economy run on fear and blood? Maybe that was the truth nobody wanted to look at directly. The hours bled away. I drank coffee until my hand shook, trying to slow the relentless march of the clock. In a few hours, I was expected to go back. I stared at the list Vaudin had given me, the paper feeling unnaturally cold in my hand. Titles like Hymn for the Drowned City, The Marrowlark's Refrain, Ashen Lullaby. They weren't songs, they were threats. This was a setup. They were gonna kill me, just like the poor bastard who played here before. I almost didn't go. I sat on my couch, keys in hand, watching the sun dip below the skyline, painting everything in shades of blood orange. But then I thought about what they could do. I thought about her perfume on my pillow. They knew where I lived. I called the rideshare, a small act of self-preservation. At least there would be a digital breadcrumb trail leading to my last known location. The alley was darker than I remembered, the air thick with the smell of wet rot and something metallic, like old blood. The club's interior was a void. The marble floors were slick with a new layer of grime. I held on to a sliver of hope that it was all a stress-induced hallucination, that I'd walk in and see a bunch of regular drunks. No such luck. Need something to steady the nerves, Casimir? The bartender, Cormac, didn't look up from polishing a glass. His skin was the color of old parchment, his movements unnervingly precise. He wasn't just tall. He was elongated, as if someone had stretched him on a rack. My throat was too tight to answer. He gave a slow, deliberate shrug and turned to serve a trio of creatures by the bar, things that looked like they were made of river mud and tangled roots, their voices a low, wet gurgle. The piano waited for me. It seemed to sigh as I approached, the wood grain swirling like pained faces. My heart hammered against my ribs. The fireplace crackled, but it gave off no warmth, only a dry, oppressive heat. If I see her, that redhead, I'm going to what? Thank her for saving my life? Ask her what the hell's going on? A chorus of guttural laughter broke my train of thought. A table of hulking, broad-shouldered patrons were pointing at me. Ogres, maybe. Their laughter sounded like rocks grinding together. Look at it, one of them growled. Thinks it can play for us. Another one, with tusks curling from its jaw, yelled, Play us something that bleeds. I fled to the bar, my throat a desert. I remembered the tap water from last night and asked for a bottled beer. Cormac looked at me for a long moment, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He slid a sweating bottle across the bar without a word and went back to his patrons, who were now methodically picking insects from each other's matted hair. The beer was warm and tasted of rust, but I choked it down. If this was the night I die, so be it. I sat down at the piano, the bench cold beneath me. Hymn for the Drowned City. One of the tusked ones bellowed, slamming a fist on his table that shook the floor. In the key of misery, another shrieked. The room grew louder, more agitated. A giant with two heads, its teeth like mismatched rows of yellowed dominoes, was idly sharpening a meat cleaver on the edge of its table. One head watched the blade, the other watched me. Their gazes were flat and hungry. I was frozen, a deer in the headlights of a dozen different species of predator. They were all so impossibly, brutally ugly. "It's rude to stare. Fresh meat," a voice hissed from the shadows. "Maybe we should tune him up first." Like the last one, that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. The severed heads mounted on the walls suddenly felt very personal. They weren't decoration, they were warnings. I took a deep, shuddering breath and placed my trembling hands on the keys. They felt warm. Not just bone, but living tissue. A faint, sickening pulse beating up into my fingertips. A bottle smashed against the wall behind me. A patron got up and started towards me. It moved with a slow, shambling gait, its form seeming to shimmer and blur at the edges, like a heat haze. Its skin was gray and slick, and its eyes were just pits of shadow. As it got closer, I could see its hands weren't hands at all. They were elongating, the flesh peeling back to reveal sharpened, jagged bone. My mind went completely blank. Every chord, every melody I'd ever learned, evaporated. Just as the thing raised its bone knife to strike, a low hum vibrated through the entire room. Persis, the redhead, was standing in the middle of the floor. With her was Vodyan. He hadn't been there a second ago. Enough. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the din like a razor. The room fell silent. Let the man play. She was wearing a simple black dress that seemed to drink the light around her. Her eyes found mine, and my heart did a painful, complicated flip. She walked to a table near the stage and sat down, and the tusked ogres who had been mocking me moments before practically scrambled over each other to give her space. The shambling creature in front of me hesitated, a low growl rumbling in its chest. It retracted its bone blades and slunk back to its table, its empty eyes never leaving my face. 50 pairs of inhuman eyes were on me. This was it. Do or die. I closed my own eyes and began to play the first thing that came to mind, a dark, bluesy rendition of an old folk song about a man who sells his soul. Anything to fill the silence. Their reaction was muted, a few grunts of what might have been approval. Tough crowd. As I transitioned into another song, the front doors of the club didn't burst open. They dissolved. The heavy oak turned to flakes of rust and cascaded to the floor in a silent red-brown pile. 6 figures stood in the doorway. They were tall and thin, seemingly cobbled together from corroded scrap metal and bone. They smelled of damp earth and tetanus. The rust dogs. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, and they carried weapons that looked like they'd been dug up from a battlefield a century ago. Their leader stepped forward. He didn't shout. His voice was the quiet rasp of metal scraping on stone. "We are looking for the keeper of the score." Silence. Vodyan and Persis were gone again, vanished into thin air. A palpable fear swept through the room. The ogres were no longer jeering, they were trembling. One of Vodyan's inner circle, a massive man-bull I'd seen by the boss's side last night, stood up, a heavy axe in his hand. "You got no business here, Scrap." The leader of the rust dogs tilted its head. "Yeehaw," it whispered, and leveled its ancient rifle. But it didn't fire at the ceiling. It fired point blank into the man-bull's chest. There was no loud bang, just a sharp thwump, and the sound of something wet hitting the floor. The man-bull looked down at the fist-sized, corroding hole in its torso, then crumpled. Then all hell broke loose. It was a silent, horrifying slaughter. The rust dogs moved with terrifying speed, their corroded blades making soft, slicing sounds as they found flesh. A pixie's head dissolved into a cloud of glittering dust. A troll went down, maggots pouring from a wound in its throat. I scrambled under the piano, my hands over my head, as the head of a rust dog rolled to a stop a few inches from my face. Its eyes were hollow, filled with a nest of tiny, scuttling spiders. Vodyan reappeared. He was just standing there, in the middle of the carnage. He spoke a single word in a language that cracked the air. The temperature in the room dropped 30 degrees. The shadows on the walls began to writhe and deepen, coalescing around him. Black, oily tendrils erupted from the floorboards, from his own skin, whipping through the air. They latched onto the rust dogs, who didn't even have time to scream. There was no fire, no explosion. Just a horrifying, grinding sound as the metal bodies were pulled apart, unmade, and dissolved into nothing more than a fine red dust that settled on every surface. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the dripping of blood from the ceiling. The floor was a battlefield of corpses and parts. The piano, somehow, was untouched. "Well," Vajin said, calmly brushing a bit of rust dust from his immaculate suit. "That was a necessary bit of housekeeping." His footsteps echoed like gunshots as he approached me. "Casimir, pick up that head for me." I stared at the rust dog's head, at the spiders crawling from its mouth. "And get up," he kicked a piano leg. "This is a place of business." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the head. It was cold and surprisingly light. I was weeping, fat, silent tears rolling down my face. "Oh, Casimir," Persis murmured. She was suddenly beside me, her touch on my arm shockingly cold. "Play us a song, something to lift the spirits." "Ashen Lullaby," Vajin snapped. I hated that song. I hated all of them. A crew emerged from a back room and began efficiently, wordlessly, dragging the bodies away. New patrons started to filter in, stepping carefully around the dark, wet stains. A pair of shadow creatures took a table right up front. I didn't take a break. I played every song I knew by heart, my mind a million miles away, stuck on survival. Hours later, the club began to empty out. Persis was sitting on the bench next to me, humming a strange, dissonant harmony to my playing. The place reeked of iron and ozone. I needed to go home. I needed a shower that would last a week. I was never, ever coming back. "Tidy," Knight Cormac said cheerfully, wiping a smear of something black from a bar stool. A cold hand dropped an envelope on the piano. It was light. "The songs," Vodian said, his voice a low rumble. His bald head seemed to pulse with dark veins. "You have not yet heard the songs." "They don't exist," I whispered, my voice raw. Vodian just smiled. He turned to Persis and kissed her, a grotesque, possessive act. I felt bile rise in my throat. I grabbed the envelope and edged toward the exit. The short flight of stairs up to the alley felt like a mountain. Each step was a monumental effort. "Never again," I muttered, pushing on the corroded door. "Oh, but you will," a dry voice rasped from above me. I froze, looking up. One of the severed heads mounted over the doorway was looking at me. Its dead, milky eyes glowed with a faint, trapped light. "You have to come back," it whispered, its jaw clicking with the effort. "The music isn't finished. It's never finished here."